convocation. And well, Dr. Thornton, you were on your fourth point about persistence. Did you finish your remarks? Did you have anything else you wanted to continue before we go into our work session?
From convocation?
Yes, sir.
No, sir.
Okay.
You have to learn when to cut it off.
Well, you did it. You did it. Yes. No, just teasing. No, you did a great job, and the entire staff did a great job, and I thought it was very well done, and it was nice to see all the recognition and awards that everyone received, and I just thought it was very well done.
It was tremendous. There was a tremendous amount of logistical planning that went into it. I can't say that I was a part of that. They just gave me the script, and everybody did their part. When you start naming names, you're going to miss something, but everybody came together over the last several weeks to pull it off, and it was magnificent to recognize all of our staff and their accomplishments. So it's a good thing. As we said there, it was about 2.5 hours a day. So when we started recognizing 100%, we'll probably be in there all day, but that's a good thing. So it was a great day.
So we look forward to the 8-hour convocation
Yes, sir.
next year. So we have a pretty full work session agenda. Ms. Wagner is on her way. She had some things she needed to take care of at the office, and Dr. Gabriel is also on the way. On our agenda for today, we have our Board of Distinction Professional Development. We have academic data review that's going to focus on the elementary schools. If you recall, at the August 5th work session, we went through middle schools and high schools, and today is for us to do elementary schools. We have several policies we need to get to, and then some other matters of the board. What I wanted to do was to really truncate a little bit the Board of Distinction Professional Development. You have on board docs, and you received the article on the 8 characteristics of an effective school board. And since we're going to have our training with CUBE on the 25th, I thought that we could wait and do that with CUBE and as part of their process with our training that we'll have, and really just take a moment and revisit our mission, parameters, and objectives, community beliefs as it is stated in our 5-year strategic plan, and see and make sure that we're still on board, or if there's some modifications we want to make, adjust that, and then yield the additional time back to Dr. Thornton and the team so they can go through the academic data review and have time for any questions we may have if everybody is comfortable with that. Yes, Ms. Doyle?
So a quick question, will we also go through our norms?
Yes, so we'll do that at the end under the matters of the board.
Okay.
Right.
Very good.
Okay. So is everybody comfortable with that adjustment? Okay. So has everyone had a chance to go back and review the community beliefs, mission, parameters, objectives, strategies? As you may recall, we started down this process in 2012, I believe it was, when we pulled together a group of community stakeholders. We had board members, members of the staff, business members, other community leaders, parents, PTA participants, and with a lot of hard work and effort, came up with these various portions of the strategic plan. Then had a group with the school board, and at that time we were still working with Panasonic, and went down and worked on some measures. But really this piece, the mission, the community beliefs, the parameters, the objectives, the strategies, at that time it was a process that called for us to really work towards agreement. We had anywhere from 25 to 30 plus individuals in the room, and we had to stay in there and work and work and work until we came out. But as we continue to move forward, and this would be the 3rd year of this effort, even though we acknowledge there's some modifications we may want to make on the operational side, I just thought it would be a good thing for us to look at this and reaffirm it as a board. And so as we move forward into our goals and other work, working under the leadership of the administration, that it can be clear to the community and clear to the district what it is that the board is affirming, and we can move forward in that regard. So does anyone have any comments, concerns, suggestions for any of the areas as we have them today? Any changes? Thoughts? Reverend Haywood? You good? Dr. Robinson?
I think that a lot of work went into this process, and I like the product, and we still haven't reached our goals yet, so I
Right.
think we should stay the course.
Okay. Ms. Basine, you were part of that committee?
I was, and as you said, the hard work, and I think I'm still affirming what's we have in here.
And Dr. Thornton, from a superintendent administrative standpoint, any thoughts, recommendations?
No, I think, again, that they were well thought out, and I think they stand the test of time and continue to keep us focused on the main thing.
Well, then, good. I mean, what I would like for us to do then is just put that on our business meeting, that we would just reaffirm it so it can be clear. And then as Dr. Thornton and the team, as you all continue to work forward, and as we as a board, after we finish our data review, establish our goals for the year, then we would do as we've done in the past and align our goals with the strategic plan. And as you all continue to work with us during work sessions and moving forward, we would align that with these points. Reverend Haywood?
I would like us to also, with the 5-year strategic plan, and there's a refinement of that strategic plan, that we would continue to review that so that that can become clear to us. We have the missions, the community beliefs, the parameters and objectives, but that 5-year strategic plan, as big as it was, being refined, we really need to look at that again and do some review of that.
Did you want to speak to that? Because I know at our retreat training over the summer, you laid out a process for us to work towards goals. You also laid out that as an administration, you all were going back and looking at the operational components of it and really begin to separate the part that we need to see from the strategic planning perspective versus what your departments are doing from a operational standpoint. But did you want to kind of comment on that, where you feel we may be going in that regard?
Well, the idea is that the strategic plan will kind of reflect a more narrow focus, that it will be more efficient in that there will be some clear, defined, measurable goals, 5 or 6. Obviously, it's going to focus on student achievement and where we want to go there. It'll focus on our human resources, and some of that is throughout the existing plan, but it's just a matter of taking that 300-plus page document and making it something that would probably be no more than 1/10 of that, and really narrowing it down. I think that'll demonstrate, not only for us, but for our community when they read it, what we're focused on. So we, once we get through this process, because I think what we said we wanted to do, we wanted to go through this process of looking at the data, particularly as it relates to student achievement, and let that drive some of the board's priorities, as well as focus for this year. And then we'll use that and go forward with trying to streamline the strategic plan. We're not going to look to reinvent the wheel. I think there are models out there that can be applied universally to us, so that's what we're going to try to do.
Come to you, but Reverend Haywood, are you
Yes.
comfortable with that? Ms.
Got it.
Basine?
The one thing I might add to this is, I noticed as I was reading through it, after all the discussions that we had around this, and this is a minor detail, but as we promote NPS as the cornerstone of our community's well-being, I think legislative advocacy is the piece that's really important, that is not covered here. So that would be my only thing to include
As a strategy?
as part of the big ideas, if that's what we were to put there. But I think to do that, I think legislative advocacy with all the changes coming and what we want, I think it's important to put that in here.
So you're saying under the first strategy, under big ideas, include legislative advocacy?
Mm-hmm.
that would be the best fit based on these strategies. That would
Right.
be the most
Yeah, I
appropriate.
was looking at this to try to see where that would be the best fit, but I think it fits there.
Any
Unless in-
objections to that, or?
I frankly would prefer to wait to modify the strategies once Dr. Thornton works towards narrowing it, so that we can say, are we even going to have 5 strategies, or will we have 3? Where would legislative go anyway? But I'm not sure we need to really tackle the 5 strategies today. I think really today's effort really is around the mission, parameters, objectives, and beliefs.
Oh, well, Mr.
Oh, I'm sorry.
See, I guess it's a maybe we should discuss what our perspective is.
Let's go
'Cause to
ahead.
me, the strategy, I think our goals, to me, I was envisioning would be separate from the strategies. The strategies are what we will do, but our goals will be more specific based on the data that we review and will be tackled, I think, at some other point once we feel we fully vetted the data.
That are associated with our priorities.
Right.
So,
Does-
pause there, Dr. Robinson.
Corner here.
Sorry, it'll fill it eventually.
Pending any changes to this, I would recommend that we have a resolution or a motion at the business meeting during the meeting itself that we vote on, at least by voice vote. Because we want to show to the community that we are behind this process, whatever changes that you feel necessary.
No, I would agree with that, and maybe for today, if you're comfortable, Ms. Banks, if we can make note of the recommendation of adding legislative advocacy as a big idea, and then let's just give the administration the opportunity to go back and look at that, and then come back and give us some thoughts. But I agree with both of you, because I think we're just down at another level, that if we reaffirm what we have here, as Dr. Robinson mentioned, and then as we move forward, we can look at any tweaks we need to make and where those tweaks should go after we, get through the next phase of the process, if that works. All right, so with that, anything else in regards to our mission, beliefs, parameters, objectives, and strategies? All right, so we will plan then at the business meeting to follow the recommendation of Dr. Robinson and not only have it on the agenda, but make sure that we do it in a vote so that we are reaffirming that and being clear to the entire community where we stand and where we are going forward. With that, I'm trying to wait for Ms. Wagner, but I know she's going to be a little delayed, but I think we need to go ahead and proceed with our academic data review, if you all are ready, Dr. Thornton.
We are ready.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan, school board members. Good afternoon. Today marks the third in a series of academic review or updates of student performance on recent standards of learning assessments back in the spring of this past school year. The first review included a 10,000-foot view and an aggregate of the division's performance as a whole. In August, at your August work session, the review was focused on our secondary schools, and we shared some very positive trends with the board, but realizing that we have a long way to go, but we're making great strides, and we're going to be relentless in our pursuit of full accreditation for all schools and all of our kids meeting the benchmarks, while at the same time developing strategies to close some very acute achievement gaps. So today, being the third in that series, we will focus on elementary school performance. Obviously, we have about 31 elementary schools, so we're going to spend a significant amount of time today looking at that information. You will also have some other information that the team will share with the board regarding the year one activities of the Office of School Improvement. Last year, when that office was implemented with the support of the Virginia Department of Education's Office of School Improvement, the board wanted to determine some clearly defined goals, and we're going to provide the board with an update on our performance as it relates to those goals that were set for that office in its first year. So those are to be the two major points of information for today, and at this point I'll turn it over to Dr. Rogers and Dr. Bailey.
Thank you, Dr. Thornton, Chairman Jordan, members of the school board, community members, and members of cabinet. Thank you. I am excited to be bringing you the second, as Dr. Thornton mentioned, of 3 presentations regarding our data. And Dr. Bailey will be assisting me with that process. And this is a continuation again from our August 5th meeting. So just to recap for the community's purposes, I know we all know our division priorities, but this presentation is in keeping with 2 of our school board and division priorities for 2014-15, which are stated in the presentation there, to ensure full accreditation, and then the second one is to increase academic achievement for all of our students. Oops. So the presentation structure will be commensurate to the structure that we shared with the secondary information, and we'll review data from 2014-15, and then we'll go into preliminary results of our SOL data for 2015-16, and then we'll talk about successful strategies and opportunities for improvement in our elementary schools, and then we'll talk about what next steps we are planning and what we've accomplished in the 4 weeks since I stood before you in August to share the data from secondary schools. So with that being said, I'm going to turn over this portion of the presentation to Dr. Bailey, who is our Executive Director of our Assessment, Research, and Accountability. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Rogers.
Sure.
This particular chart is just a recap of what you saw last month. I would like to point out to you that the state will be trying to implement new accountability ratings as it relates to schools that are accredited with warning, accreditation denied. There'll be new ratings. I believe it might be 4 or 5 or 6 of those ratings, and so that is due to be shared with the public October, I think the latter part of October. And so this is what we have right now, but I did want to share that with you. So moving on to our elementary schools. You've seen this chart before, which illustrates how we have done in the major content areas. And here we're showing that we have improved in all areas. Certainly we have great improvement in math, where we have improved each year that we have taken the assessment. This is the 3rd year of the more rigorous assessments in English and science. Accreditation for our elementary schools. Briefly, let me explain this, in that we have 4 years of data. Highlighted in green are those areas where we have met the benchmark. There is an asterisk where if the school did not meet the benchmark with the current year and they met it with the 3-year average, we have put an asterisk by that so that you could see that. In the 4th column under 15 is the current year, shaded in a darker green, to let you know that they have achieved the benchmark in those particular areas. I did add at the top what the benchmark is for each of those areas for English, combining English and writing, but not really for elementary, but 75% is the benchmark, 70% is the benchmark for math and for history and science. This is really to give you an opportunity to quickly see where some of our gaps in improvement are.
Just for clarification purposes, I'm looking at Bayview.
Yes.
In 2012, you have an asterisk next to their math score, and they had an 82, but I thought 70% was the
Right.
pass rate.
And the 82 was a 3-year average, and apparently for that current year, they did not meet a 70%, so a 3-year average helped them to achieve the benchmark.
Okay.
So it may have been like 69, 68 for that year.
Okay.
So the prior 2 years were higher. But that was the new year of the math standards.
Stats, yeah, right.
Yes. Okay. A few little summarizations related to our elementary level. Certainly 13 out of 31 we feel will meet the requirements for full accreditation. We've done very, very well in history where there's 29 out of 31 elementary schools that have met or exceeded the benchmark, and then 24 or 31 out of the elementary schools that met or exceeded the benchmark in math. We feel very good about that because in the prior year, it was 17 out of 33. A lot of our schools made double-digit gains, and we recognize those schools today as well. And we feel that we have shown improvement in all of the tested areas in English, math, history, and science. So moving on to looking at our elementary performance by subgroups in reading. This is very similar to what you saw last month, looking at all of our students, certainly our ethnicity subgroups, economically disadvantaged, LEP, students with a disability. I would like to highlight for you that we have added the performance of our gifted students requested by the board there in the yellow with a very high performance. Looking at the same subgroups in math. Our students with a disability have really improved in their performance, almost 10 percentage points, not quite, but we feel that we're on a great trajectory of improving every year coming forward. Again, added our students that are identified as gifted, that are performing at a very high level. Here we have some information on our priority and focus schools. Looking at English reading. We have 3 years' worth of data. Each school is identified either as a P or F, P for priority, F for focus, at the elementary and middle school level. We have our Tanners Creek School that has done very, very well with double-digit gains. We see the same thing in math.
Just remind us the definitions of priority and focus schools.
I'm not sure how good I am, and I might need assistance from my colleagues from the Office of School Improvement, but priority is the lowest, 5%? Okay, and focus is the lowest, 10%?
Statewide.
Statewide, yes. For federal. Yeah, federal requirements.
But based on the state population, Virginia.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Reverend Haywood has a question.
Really, is it okay to ask now, or should we just wait? Okay, so I was looking at the subgroups, and it's interesting to me that among the subgroups that the scoring for the Asian subpopulation has been decreasing, both in math and reading. And I was wondering, what explains that? Do we have an understanding of that?
One of the things that I do know is that our LEP population is growing, and it might be growing in those particular subgroups in our Asian
Okay.
subgroup. We have not looked at that in great detail, but we do know that our LEP population is growing, and it may be having an impact on performance for those students. We have some Pacific Islanders that are also being identified, newly identified within our district, and so they would also partially fall into that category.
Thank you.
Okay, pass rates by reading grade level. Recently, it was asked if we could provide some more detailed information, and so what you have before you is a similar chart that you have seen throughout the school year, a horizontal chart of our performance of our elementary schools. The red line represents the benchmark, and there you can see how our schools have performed leading up to 100% passing. I've tried to identify those schools that are paired with an asterisk and the name of the paired school. So the first asterisk is with Fairlawn and Poplar Halls. So you would see the combination of those students all together and how they performed on the SOL reading assessment for grade 3.
I think it's worth noting that as you compare 3, 4, and 5, obviously they're different populations of students, but the performance at the 3rd grade level is lagging in somewhat of a significant way when you compare it to 4th and 5th grade. So we realize that in the early years, we're going to have to make sure that our Tier 1 instruction is addressing these needs that are reflected in this data. Because obviously, if we don't make the necessary adjustments in grade 3, then at some point it's going to roll over into grade 4 and then grade 5. And then, of course, then we move into middle school and then high school, and then it's a matter of we just get further and further behind. So we understand the importance of teasing out this data by grade. So that's what we're going to be focused on as well.
Okay. Ms. Messina?
That's what and I guess that was one of my questions, looking at the cohorts to see how they're doing over time. Are we going to be looking at this particular data in that way as we delve more deeply into the academic gains that we're looking at?
So if I understand your question, are we going to be following this last year's cohort of 3rd graders into how they perform 4th grade this year?
Well, even looking at our 5th graders, for instance, and looking at, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, looking at that cohort to see how they have improved over time.
Right, I think that we have anecdotally noted that our 4th graders the year before, who were 5th graders last year, performed very well. And so those 5th graders now are going into 6th grade, and so we anticipate the same rate of performance. But we are looking at how students perform the longer they stay with us from 3rd, 4th, 5th as a cohort over time. And so in years past, when we looked at that data, we found the longer they stay with us, the better they perform.
And then when they come to us, pre-K, kindergarten, 2nd grade, we've got to be focused on them as well to get them to the 3rd grade so they'll be ready once they get to 3rd grade.
But as you are looking at this performance and you see the wide range of performance across schools, who can kind of speak to what you're seeing? I mean, what is it that we should be giving attention as we prepare to talk about goals or talk about other initiatives? Is there any rhyme or reason to the fact that there's such wide disparity between or amongst the various schools?
I'm going to defer to Dr. Rogers.
Mr. Jordan, I think that's a great question when you look at data, and I have prepared some things to share with the board at the end that will address that very question. So I could answer it now, or we could wait until the
It's
end
fine.
to address that specific question.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
Hey, Ms. Doyle?
I think I'll add on to that, because one of my questions is going to be, how do we triangulate that with student attendance, discipline, et cetera, et cetera? So if there's a school with a high performance, is there an indicator that, there was also high, low discipline, high attendance, strong parent engagement, and maybe in the schools that didn't perform as well, did we triangulate other data that maybe said, maybe those are indicators for maybe lower performing?
Sure.
Simply. So I think we just can't look at it in
Right.
isolation, which I think you were getting at.
Yes.
Okay, at the 4th grade level, very quickly, we have 14 schools that met or exceeded the benchmark. And then moving on to 5th grade, we have 13 schools that met or exceeded the benchmark of 75%. Now moving into math, we will see a slightly, oh, I'm sorry.
So it's like if you look at Taylor at 3rd grade reading, so you see where the school was slightly below the benchmark. When you look at 4th grade, they're over it, almost up to 80%. And then when you look at 5th grade, it's even further along. So I know are these some of the types of things you all will be talking us through?
Yes, and that's some of the things that we look at, certainly our content coordinators look at, as well as our school personnel look at how students have performed over time. They also look at their cohort students. Certainly our fifth graders, this is their third year against being tested against the more rigorous standards. And so we feel that, let's just say their rate of adjustment is a little bit better than the third and the fourth, and we anticipate we'll see the same pattern as we move forward.
History the only area that we're due for a new set of rigorous standards in the near future?
Yeah. Yes. Bruce?
Yes, the State Board of Education adopted the 2015 standards. This past summer, there was revisions made to the curriculum framework. That will be available sometime this fall for public input. It's expected that the State Board will adopt the curriculum framework late this fall or sometime over the winter. There will be continued developments, but the new standards, along with the new test, will be in effect for school year 2017-18. So 2 years from now, we'll fully adopt it. Between now and then, there will be field-tested items showing up on the current test, but the whole set of new standards and tests will be in effect.
So math, English, and science will remain in place for the foreseeable future, is that the idea?
Yes. Yeah. Moving on to math. This is our fourth year of being assessed against the more rigorous standards. Our performance certainly is quite different here for grade 3 than compared to English reading. We have 19 schools that have met or exceeded the benchmark of 70%. Then as we move on to grade 4, we have 24 that have met or exceeded the benchmark. And then we have 24 that have met the benchmark or exceeded for grade 5. So in some of our schools, as Mr. Jordan pointed out, they might be doing well in one grade level and not so well in another grade level, and so the work continues. Okay. So on to the impact of our expedited retakes. I tried to also create a graph that you have seen before where we have overlaid the progress. And so what we have done is giving you a before and after picture, collapsing grades 3, 4, and 5. The blue line represents the before performance, pass rates, and then the green line represents certainly the after performance. But because you can't see the full green line, you see the impact of the students who were eligible to retake the assessment and were successful on that assessment. So,
This was the first year that retakes were permitted at the elementary level tested areas. And I believe for the range of 375 to 399.
yes, that's
So
correct.
for those kids across the Commonwealth who tested in these areas in elementary, and the first score was 375 to 399, then divisions were allowed to retest those kids. We had to get permission from the parents to do that, and we were able to do that along with the school division across the Commonwealth.
With 400 being the
400 being the pass. Yes,
Good skills.
sufficient.
Ms. Basine?
So I have two questions.
Okay.
How many retakes were students allowed to take?
Um,
Yeah, okay.
with respect to tests,
Yeah,
up to 4 for 5th grade, certainly 2 for 3rd and 4th. But for 5th grade, they could take up to 4 tests. They could retake the test, yes.
up to 4.
If they met the criteria.
Right.
Yes.
If they fell within that range. And then did you, have you had a chance to look at any disparities across the schools since parents had to give permission? What percentage of parents gave permission versus those that didn't at each of the schools?
I would say a high percentage gave permission. It was a small amount of parents that felt like they did not want their child or children to retake the test.
Okay.
And so some of our schools called and shared that with us, and so that we would be aware of that. But I would say a high percentage agreed.
As far as the retests go, is that 4 times per that subject? Or is it if they didn't meet the cutoff for English, math, science, and history, that they could take up to those 4 tests over?
The latter that you
Okay.
mentioned, they could take up to 4 different types of
Okay.
tests.
So they were only allowed to take that particular test one time?
One time per content,
Okay.
yes. Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, sorry.
They could take up to 4 tests, but only 1 per content.
Right.
Mhm.
What kind of preparation was done for the children before the retake?
I
Well,
believe that it varied.
It varied
and
from school to school.
From school to school. I
Right.
might call on my coordinators, content coordinators, if they might want to share some things that they may have seen at each of the schools. Ms. Britton?
Come to the mic, please, sir. Okay.
From the science perspective, we took a detailed look at the initial SOL test scores of the students, and we worked very quickly to identify students specifically. So we drilled down from those SOL tests to the student question reports. And we went into buildings and worked specifically with students based on their needs. So it was a very detailed and very strategic approach, to the remediation that we provided. Our teacher specialists went into buildings, as I stated, and worked in those small groups with students.
And in English, we did the same thing, and the only thing I would add is that the groups were very small. They were like 3 and 4 children at a time that they worked with, but very focused on the report that's given to the teachers after they take that first initial test. It tells you exactly what this child needs to work on, and that's what the teachers did. They focused on those objectives.
The only thing I would add is we have had experience at the secondary level that this has been going on for years, and so we had our high school department chairs share some, because the elementary, some of it was systematic in terms of how does retakes look for the school day. They were used to, after SOL testing was done, it was job complete, and our high schools were able to kind of communicate, here's what this is really going to look like. It's going to take structural planning in your day to pull the students out, like they were saying, looking at the reports and that kind of thing. So a lot of preparation ahead of time to say, should this happen, this is how we can move quickly, because you only get like a week to work with the student, but here's how we can move quickly to bring them up.
Ms. Basine?
I'm curious about some of the other characteristics of the kids that took retakes. For instance, did you see a greater percentage of 3rd graders taking retakes, and also for among our children with special needs? Were they, with the same rules applied in terms of the number of tests that they could take, or accommodations made for that specific subgroup?
Yes, for our students with a disability, anytime they would retake a test, they would receive the same accommodation that they would normally have for the regular test.
Okay.
And so it's really up to the parent if a student with a disability failed 4 tests but were eligible to retake, should they take all 4 tests, or should they just take English, reading, and math? And so certainly that's up to the parent to decide that and to see what's best for the child. We did find that the third grade, there weren't as many students who were eligible to take the tests as what we saw for fourth and fifth grade. And I do have a more detailed report that breaks it down by ethnicity and gender and so forth, looking at the percentages and the success rate.
Dr. Robinson?
My question revolves, I'd like somebody to give me a little bit of an explanation on the reteaching itself, so that we can delineate between teaching to the test and teaching the standards. I'd like somebody to make me feel comfortable about that.
Can I add to that? Because I was going to ask a similar thing. I mean, describe to us what we're really learning from this. Are we learning that as children become more comfortable taking the test, they do better? Or as Dr. Robinson described, is it something else? I mean, what is it about the retake other than giving additional focus and attention to a high-stakes test? I mean, what is it that we should really learn and glean from the retakes and the fact that the scores improved with the retakes?
Right. While Dr. Rogers is coming up, I will say in general, sometimes you have a bad day.
Mm-hmm.
And so another day, it's sun shining and you just feel good and you do better. And that's just in general for some students. And so, Dr. Rogers.
That is a great question, and I'm so glad that you asked it. Having been a middle school principal that fell into the category where you don't have an opportunity to have a kid demonstrate what they've learned for the year. So I like to pose it from that standpoint and not saying that they're taking a test. You're demonstrating what was taught and what you learned. From the middle school standpoint, by not giving a student an opportunity to demonstrate what they've learned, and you find out as a teacher that this student does not know how to add fraction or has not mastered that skill, and this is the skill that keeps them from meeting minimal standards, having that additional week or two to have data that says this student does not know how to add fraction, I can pull that student and utilize my math specialist, my interventionist, and group them together and adjust my schedule so that I can teach the student, that group of students, how to add fractions so that they have a better understanding. So when I send them to the next grade level, because math builds, and I'm using math as an example, and you can probably tell I'm getting real passionate about it, because I had kids that were at 399, and you look at the data and you see, okay, I know I just need them for another couple of days so I can show him how to be successful with adding fractions. So when I send you to 7th grade, you'll be on target with your peers to be ready for those next steps. So to answer your question, that data is huge when you get the initial piece of information from the first round of SOL testing so that students and teachers and administrators can be purposeful and strategic with how they structure remediation for 3-4 days. Sometimes high schools don't even have that much time, but being really purposeful and strategic and creating lessons and plans and activities and getting kids excited and encouraging them if they've had a bad day to master that one concept or two concepts, because typically that's why the margin is at 375 to 399, because typically those students have not missed a lot of pieces of information. You just need a little bit to help them understand what was taught if they didn't master it the first time, or in some cases the second time. So does that help? I got kind of loud, so I'm sorry.
That's good. That's what I wanted to hear.
Sure.
I had the inkling that that's what that was about.
Right.
I just wanted someone to speak to that so the public can hear
Sure.
that too.
And that's it. That would be what I would share.
We can go around the room. Ms. Basine, you may want to stay there. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I know, you got me fired up too now.
Okay.
So, and I know this is the first year for the retakes.
Sure.
Across the board, but just looking at the data, did you notice a greater number of students that were eligible to take the retest as compared to last year? I mean, just by looking, like if you were to look at the eligibility last year, that.
We have not looked at that.
Okay.
to do it.
Because I asked that, because, as we all know, with our new information system or data system that was implemented this year, did teachers, my thought was around, did teachers have a more difficult time determining where the students were needing greater help? So that was the reason for asking that question. Does that make sense?
Finish?
Well, I'll build on that,
Okay,
Ms.
Bob.
Basine.
Mhm.
The benchmarks and the CFAs that are given during the year, those are to also help, and you can correct me if I'm mistaken, to identify gaps in learning, or if we need to reteach a certain content area, so that this SOL data that they're receiving should not be the first time that they're seeing that a student might have deficiencies in adding fractions, for example.
Right. You're
So the
absolutely right.
benchmarks and the
That's formative
CFAs are your
assessment.
precursor.
You're asking about formative assessment, which
Mhm.
gives a snapshot in time based on information that was taught in a given amount of time. So the purpose of those CFAs is to identify which students do not understand how to add and subtract fractions in some cases. And it provides the teacher or the group of educators to formulate a plan to help those students better master that skill. Now, that's a second dose, and that's part of the RTI process. And in some cases, students are able to master it that second time. Some cases, they need a third dose. And it may give pause for consideration when they take the SOL test at the end of the year, that they may need an additional support system. It just, with it being, the range being 375 to 399, it really boils down to just a few questions in some cases, which is one of the reasons probably why the state elected to narrow the range and scope, so as not to set students up for failure if they have tremendous gaps in their learning.
Thank you.
So just comment, Mr. Chairman, I noticed that Fairlawn in their math retakes, they were wildly successful, so they must be doing something right there. I don't know how many students took that retake, maybe just a few, but they must have discovered the magic formula here or something,
Right, and they may have had several students that were between 390 and 399,
Mhm.
and they have just really missed one concept.
Yep.
And so, but yes, they were very successful.
But, oh, I'm sorry.
The one thing I'll note just in general, I just do my own math here, is that it looks like in reading, 14 of the 31 schools were positively impacted by it, and then 7, I believe, for math, which is tremendous. I mean, almost
Yeah.
50% were impacted positively by the reading retake opportunity, which we didn't have before now.
Right.
And that's significantly impacting now our division scores.
Yes.
So I'm very thankful that the state has given us this opportunity at this grade level, because the upper level students are able to take advantage of it, and I'm thrilled that we've been able to master what we can do at the high school and middle in terms of how we target the students and instruct them
Right.
to do better even at a younger age.
Exactly.
So-
I'm excited. I agree. I think, for reading, it begs a different question, but certainly for math, because it builds and they need skills from one grade level to the next in order to be successful.
I mean, this made a huge impact on our division this year.
Yeah, and I struggle with it, and as we get to the point we start talking about goals, so there's one piece of it where Dr. Rogers described what I thought the SOLs were supposed to be about anyway, being somewhat of a diagnostic that then gives the education expert an idea of how the student is performing, and then make decisions on what the child would need next in order to be successful. So there's that piece of it. But then there's the retake piece that still seems like it's being driven by, what does your ultimate score look like? And so I guess there's that balance between trying to make sure that you retake so that you can demonstrate the score, but also trying to make sure that, for us at the end of the day, making sure that the child is being assessed accordingly or appropriately in order to get what they need as they move forward.
Absolutely.
And I
So
think
that we
that,
avoid the retake even opportunity.
right. So I think when we get back and start talking about goals and our measures of success, I think that's part of what we need to be able to really kind of drill down. What does success look like for us, both in terms of mastery of the content area, but then also the standardized tests and other things that we look at. Dr. Robinson?
In my estimation, in my observation over the last 4+ years, is that that's the fundamental flaw of the SOL testing. It's not prescriptive in nature, which it should be. It's more punitive. And that's what it's become. And that's why it's imperative that we work with the state to figure out a workable solution so that it can get back to being what it's supposed to be, and that's to prescribe what a child is missing and give the educators an opportunity to help support the child.
You want to keep going? Oh,
Okay.
you have
Well,
one other?
You may want to stay there, Doc.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Let's get him a chair.
This is more a question maybe for the board. I have the same thought. Is there a possibility to look at this data according to how the students are doing, like on their report cards and benchmark and CFA assessments to see how they correlate? Because I think that would be interesting to look at. Because typically, as Dr. Gabriel alluded to, you should be able to know where the deficiencies are before they take the SOL. So I think it'd be interesting, and even looking at it over time, I know going forward, you'll look at the baseline data in the beginning of the year and see how that child is progressing over the year, but I think it'd be interesting to look at that.
And having been around for the last couple of years, I think throughout last year at least, whenever we presented the CFA information data or the benchmark assessment data, that question always came up.
Yeah.
Is this going to correlate to how we think kids are going to perform on the SOLs? Is it predictive? And I think Dr. Bailey would try to clarify for the board during that time and again today.
Well, in the past, you can say, in the past, we had enough data, and our assessment structure allowed us to look at the correlation, and we did have a high correlation, and so we were able to predict. We've had several different administrations since then, and some changes in their viewpoint, and so our assessments have changed, which has decreased our ability to be able to do that. So we're hoping to get back to that. Certainly, in order to do a true correlation, we need both assessments to be relatively the same number of items, and so forth. And so we're trying to get to that, to get back to that.
Billy.
I think,
There's a concern about the amount of testing that kids are having to undergo. But there's a need in order for the teachers to be able to objectively assess where a student is, how they've demonstrated their knowledge, and where they have to focus their attention. If there's a way for us to continue to work on going back and finding the correlates between the SOL, refining our CFAs and our benchmarks, because what that in turn will do is it will drive professional development. Because if they're noticing that fractions are a common deficit, or the use of punctuation is a common deficit, that in turn leads to your professional development, which is what we strive to do anyway, to not necessarily look at the end result, to go back to the beginning and figure out where can we fix the problem at the beginning. So I know that there's a lot that is not necessarily explained in the CFAs and the benchmarks, but if we can glean every amount of data from those that the kids are having to undergo, and it's very understandable from the parents about the testing anxiety and whatnot, we have to let them know that it's going to have an outcome that will drive student success in the long run.
Dr. Billy, maybe talk a little bit about the work we've done this summer to restructure and refocus our assessment plan for this year, and how we included principals and staff as well.
Certainly, in the work of Ms. Campson, we looked at what we had been doing, and it was gleaned that we needed to have shorter assessments, which articulated to monthly assessments. And in the meantime, we felt that those students who showed deficiencies on a shorter item assessment, that they may need some remediation, and then reassess to see if they then increase their knowledge based on that. And so we implemented the Form A, Form B. So what we have done is created a schedule for this school year so that we would have monthly assessments, as well as scheduled DBA assessments, so that we could inform you which a larger portion of information on how our students are doing. Did you want to add anything further? Yeah.
Well, just for a moment, going back to what Ms. Basine raised earlier, and I think we've talked about as a board, I mean, we know that the state has measures, we know that the federal government has measures, but we get to decide what other measures are considered success for our students. And I think that's part of the conversation that we'll need the administration to help us work through, so that we're just not looking at SOLs, but we are looking at these other measures that we deem are important, and that's how we can continue our work moving forward. So I think that's part of our job, and that's something that we need to be able to do.
Yeah, I think ultimately that's the scorecard.
Right, exactly.
SATs, ACTs.
Right.
Grades,
Yeah.
grades at the lower school, discipline, all sorts of things. It's multifactorial, it's not just SOL, AMO.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, one other?
Oh, I was gonna say the same thing, like our gifted students, I'm using that group because they, according to this, to me, it says that they test the best,
Yes.
perhaps.
Right.
But we don't know, I think it's important to know what sort of academic gains they're making, and even though our children with special needs are, according to the data presented, are underperforming, I think we need to more specifically see how they're academically doing other, in other realms. So, with using other data. So I think it's a conversation to continue, just as you said.
Okay, we'll let you get back on, aren't you glad you got the 90 minutes?
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on and looking at our performance by subgroups. We pulled this information from the spreadsheets that were shared with us by our Department of Education. And what you'll see is similar information to our accreditation. The benchmark still is 75%. We have highlighted in the green boxes to indicate where they have met the benchmark. The less than sign indicates that they had a small group of students in that subgroup and too small to report, following the guidelines from VDOE. And then the dash just indicates that there were no students in that particular subgroup for that school. Here, even though we have the peered schools listed individually, or I think we took them out of this particular piece. So you can see that we do have more green boxes on the math side, but next year we hope to see as equally as many green boxes under English as we see under mathematics. And this particular chart has combined both grades 3, 4, and 5 together for both English, reading, and math. Okay. So this kind of leads us to our scatter plot. I'm not sure how many of you remember this illustration that was provided to us by VSBA, but it was suggested maybe we would try this with some of the data that we have. And so what I pulled for you is English reading for our students who are identified as economically disadvantaged, coupled with the percent economically disadvantaged at the school. So we have plotted all of our elementary schools. The areas where you see their boxes indicate those are our outliers, so that you could see which schools they are. At this point, we have a downward line, which indicates a negative correlation or negative association. So that means that this information or the economically disadvantaged factor is not causal for performance. And so we have two schools that are performing almost at the same performance level, but have opposite ends of economically disadvantaged students. So this sort of supports that economically disadvantaged is not a causal factor for our students as they performed on this particular assessment.
Can we pause there for a moment?
Certainly.
So, can you describe you say you have a couple of outliers,
Yes.
and,
The outliers are the schools that are named in the boxes. So they're outside of in statistical terms, it's called best fit, where you would see a cluster of your schools, and it creates a best fit line. And so we have what we call a negative trend. Right here is where we have our cluster of schools, and it's a downward.
Ms. Basine?
You know, like you said, not necessarily a causal situation, but I'm curious what this looked like over the last 3 years, because I know there's been targeted interventions at some of these schools, and my question is, have these schools that are doing, that have met the benchmark, are they doing better because of those targeted interventions? And have there been enrollment changes at those schools that maybe, Campus Stella Monroe hasn't seen? I'm just curious to see if that has been the case over the last few years, or if it's a new trend that we're looking at.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I would agree with that, and in addition to that, I would look at the retake, because that's another variable.
Right.
Because the retakes are a variable, because it pushed up the scores. So if we really want to measure how the interventions did, we need to take that variable out, so.
Right. Yep.
But I'd just like to thank you all for doing the scattered plot.
Yes.
It was,
It's
yeah,
great.
it was something that we went through, and staff has worked on. I think it does help us to ask some questions and to see some things. So I appreciate you all doing that.
Thank you. And so we did do the same thing with reading, and you don't see the same type of thing, but a lot of our schools are below the benchmark. Some of our outliers are the same.
But, part of what's interesting, so we know that we talk about small class sizes, and we know that Willoughby has been a very small
Right.
class size.
Yes.
And so one would think that that's had some impact.
Right.
That's had some,
Right.
which is a good thing.
Right.
And, we start talking about budgets and ratios and things of that type. If we find that there's other data, they're so small, but if
Right.
there's other data to support that, then we have our discussion around priorities and something we should consider. It's also,
44 elementary schools.
what's that?
We need 44
Exactly. And, or extended learning time.
All right. More
But it's also interesting when we look at the definition of success. Then when you start to break it down in other areas, it may cause us to, going back to what we just discussed a few minutes ago, how we define the multiple measures of success. So I just think it's very, very, very good data to look at, very good chart.
Thank you. And
So I noticed the compilation of 3 to 5 grades, grade 3 to 5. Does this look different when you separate the grades out?
it might look different, yes.
Yeah, so I wonder if we need to do that too, at some point. And I know this is very good, so I'm not suggesting that this is not, but I just
Right.
wonder, here we've grouped it 3 to 5, we're
Right.
getting a good global picture. But to your point, Dr. Thornton, earlier, if, let's just say, grade 3 reading is not up to where it needs to be, and 4 and 5 is strong, what does that look like here with just grade 3?
The ED is a different kind of relationship
Right,
with
Yeah.
ED.
right. So I think that would be good for us to get as well.
Okay, so Moving on, we thought it would be good to break out the goals that were established at the very beginning of the year that was shared with you in October 1, I believe it was, at the work session for 2014. These goals were established for this year's performance. You have 3 bars. Certainly, the target bar is illustrated by the blue line. The actual performance is the green line in the middle. And then the gold line or orange line is our baseline that was used to then evaluate and set the goals. So this is broken out by elementary and the 4 content areas, middle, and the 4 content areas, and high. We included writing in here because there were writing goals established for both middle and high school. We went past the target area in one particular category, that is at history at the middle school level. While we showed improvement in all of the areas from the baseline, we did not meet the target.
So what does that tell, I mean, is it in terms of the targets that we set, I mean, what is it telling us?
What we talked about was, what was the process for determining those targets? What was it based on? Did we look at what the individual schools' targets were? And how did those roll up to inform the targets that we did district-wide? And from a process standpoint, I don't believe that we tried to make the connection between what the individual schools' targets were and how that would inform these division-wide targets. So the short answer is, going forward, we've got to refine how we determine the targets. Obviously, we want them to be aspirational, but at the same time, we want them to be appropriate, valuable, and valid. So that's a process we've got to figure out how can we best define that and refine it.
Mm-hmm. Right, certainly we could look at, statistically speaking, averaging out targets, looking at our performance of the last 3 to 5 years, and we could provide some benchmarks for that using that methodology. That's excluding everything else, or we could take another different approach statistically to look at it and then determine what the targets should be.
I think you're going to a Q&A slide.
Yep.
So I think we've done a lot of Q&A, but anybody have anything additional in this section? Otherwise, we just have one request. Back in the original slots, we were showing the green boxes with the 3-year averages. I'd still like for us to be able to see what the performance was for 1 year. Because when we look at it in the 3-year averages.
You're talking about for the accreditation?
Yes, yes.
All the way back.
It's like on slide 10. So if you look at, I'm just picking the school, so Tarleton Mathematics has 84, and then it has the percent passing based on the 3-year average. Where would we see what the data was for this year? I recognize for the accreditation purposes, or preliminary accreditation purposes, you can use the 3-year averages, but if we wanted to just see how our schools did this past year, you know, being able to see that year to year.
Okay, and would you like to see that for the 4 years that we have for the accreditation and just see the current year's results for each year?
If that's what you recommend, yes.
Yes, that's what I recommend.
So another version of this.
Right.
But pulling out the 1 year.
Pull out the averages.
For that year.
Right.
Got it.
was the averages.
The
how it came
averages.
out. I was, thought that was the number that they achieved at and then averaged out to create the, making accreditation
Right.
at that time.
Right, and trying to give you the information similar to what the state would provide.
Right.
And so certainly we can give it to you for each current year. That's not a problem. Okay. Any other questions?
So, to the slide that you were on,
Mhm.
the latest slide, how did the schools with 12 percentage point gains differ from those with 2? Because I know they ranged. I mean, did you look at the characteristics of the students to see how they differed, why they differed?
To explain the difference in performance
Yeah.
and their increase?
Mm-hmm.
No, we have not broken it down by individual schools.
Mhm.
I do know that our content coordinators have looked at that as they prepare for this school year to see what type of support they may need to provide for schools. But we have not looked at that sort of like a profile of each school to see what other characteristics may be different. We could try to do that. They cluster some of our schools together that are similar
Mhm.
and look at their range of improvement compared to other cluster of schools. We could do that. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I think I think
Okay.
it'd be interesting to look at that.
Okay. Having no more questions at this point? Okay.
I have a process question. I don't know if you're, or if Dr. Rogers can answer this. So in the schools where you may see less gain, or even more gain, do you then dive deeper to look by classroom? Were there classes that had bigger gains than other classes? And if so, how did the teachers collaborate? Or how do you kind of, diagnose and kind of figure out where the challenges were, where the strengths were,
Dr. Rogers. While Dr. Rogers is coming up, obviously, when you have a school in the aggregate that, let's say, they are at 40%, then the opportunity to get to 60%, 20 points in 1 year, are much greater than a school that's at 90%, and to go 10 points to 100%. So just the numbers themselves, the challenge to increase at those significant double-digit rates. But in terms of process-wise, what will they do with the data? Dr. Rogers.
That's a great question, and it's one that schools don't typically wait until the end of the school year when they get SOL results to begin having conversation about what is and what is not working. I think it's essentially what you're asking. So when schools have formative assessments, we talked about the DBAs or division benchmark assessments, as well as the formative assessments. What are we? The formative assessments. Schools hold common meeting plan data team meetings, and that's when they have conversations about how students performed on those formative assessments, and then they can have dialogue about what are the top 3 items that students missed, what does that translate into, what are the skills that kids don't understand, and then you have a conversation with, for example, if Dr. Bailey and I were teammates, if her students did very well on adding fractions and my kids did not, we could have a conversation about what strategies that you find successful, what are the skills that you taught your students, and that way we can share best practices on how to get all of our students where they need to be. So those conversations do take place systemically throughout the course of the school year, and not only at this time of year. The other thing that we will have conversations with our building principals is to take a look at global data, to have specific conversations about what did your teachers do to get the gains that you saw in specific areas. So we'll have a chance to do those conversations. As a matter of fact, we did have a training with our principals last week with the Virginia Department of Education, where we started the conversation about digging a little deeper into how we look at our data.
Ms. Wagner?
I know I'm Johnny come lately, so I'm not really sure. We basically just went over the elementary,
Yes.
but are we open for all the grade levels?
So they have another section that they're gonna
Oh,
do after
okay.
this.
Okay.
And then
well,
there's,
we can-
then they'll be finished with everything to date, at least from elementary, middle, and high.
High,
And
yes.
if you have any additional questions, absolutely.
Okay, after that, okay.
Okay. All right. So our next section focuses on how do we compare our results to the state and select divisions. What we have done is we have selected certain districts that are local to us, such as Virginia Beach, Chesapeake, Suffolk, and Portsmouth. And we have also selected other districts that are considered urban districts. Norfolk is the largest urban district in Virginia, but we have some other districts that are considered urban. And what we have provided for you is their enrollment based on fall membership state report and their percent that are economically disadvantaged, which also came from the fall. There are some districts that have schools that can participate in the community. I think it's the child nutrition program.
Community eligibility.
And so that provides an opportunity for all students to participate in the lunch program. So this is just a cursory look of similar districts, and you can see the enrollment comparison. We are very close to Newport News. So as we look at our information, at the very top, we have the performance of the state of Virginia for the content area of reading. Collapses all of the reading for elementary, Norfolk's performance, and then the other districts. Same thing for mathematics. We're very close to the performance of the state, but you can also see how many of other school districts have met the benchmark of 70% or higher. Looking at history, a lot of the school districts have met the benchmark and higher and progressing to 100%.
Yes, ma'am.
Elementary or whole?
We're looking at, I think it might be whole. I was just looking at a couple of the results, and I think we might be looking at whole.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure.
So that collapses elementary, middle, and high.
Right.
Yeah. And last, science. Okay, and now we're on to, unless there are questions about this particular segment.
Okay, just an observation if I'm looking at it correctly. So I know I had asked you all to add Virginia Beach and Chesapeake, some of the suburban districts as well. So where you have a Norfolk that is almost 30 points and almost twice as much in terms of percentage of economically disadvantaged, when you look at the pass rates, while we are lagging, we are, 10 points, 15 points
Behind.
off. So in some ways, it demonstrates how well we are doing and how well we
Right.
need to continue to do, or it could demonstrate how poorly others are doing, depending upon how you look at it.
Right.
But it's just interesting because we often compare, the urban schools and we don't compare the schools as a whole.
Right.
But I just thought it was good data just to be able to compare because we want our children to compete with everyone, but also being able to see like, or in some cases,
Right.
Whatever the comparisons are.
Right.
So, Dr. Robinson?
One point you bring up on a repeated basis is school systems that are hyper poverty. have more challenges. And if we could balance out the poverty, what if it wouldn't be a good idea to try to review how our economically disadvantaged students do in comparison to Virginia Beach, Chesapeake, and some of the other suburban schools, to see if there's a difference in that, to ferret out a little bit more of what you've been thinking in the past.
Well, even if you go back to the scattered.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, we have gaps within our
Yes, we
schools,
do.
so, yeah. But you're right.
Okay. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Rogers.
I'm sorry, Ms. Wagner, did you have questions now, or did you want to ask after Dr. Rogers talks about where we think the gains have come from and so forth?
I can wait until after
Okay.
he finishes.
All right.
That's fine.
Okay. Let me grab all my stuff.
Thank you, Dr. Bailey. So, as was shared in our August 5th meeting, all of the principals were asked the question, to what do we attribute our gains in student achievement where we saw gains? And 4 themes emerged in both the secondary principals' responses as well as the elementary principals' responses. And this slide that's up in front of you should be familiar from the last time we met. And the 4 themes that emerged were curriculum and instruction, having a strong focus on that, assessment, looking at data, as well as using those 3 items to drive professional development. And I'd like to share some specifics that came out from the elementary principals. And I'm not going to read them all, but just 3 I'd like to point out to you, and they're in keeping with the conversation that we've had so far this evening. The first I'd like to point out is having targeted objectives in our lesson plans. Last year, the division spent quite a bit of time talking about how to refine and be purposeful with how we write lesson plans, and we will certainly continue that work with our teachers as well as with our administrators in terms of how we provide feedback to our teachers with regard to specificity in the lesson plans. The second one I'd like to point out is having purposeful collaboration on writing those lesson plans and not working in isolation, which goes to the question that Mrs. Bassine asked about how we collaborate with assessment as well as with planning. So that work was done last year, and they feel that that attributed to the gains that they got last year. And the last piece I'd like to point out is being very purposeful with how they use the interventionists as well as the specialists in their building to provide the support for not only our teachers but well as with our students and small groups. And on this last slide, I'd like to direct your attention to the very last bullet, which talks about how they used response to intervention last year, and we will certainly continue that work with how to refine the structures and the practices that are in place with how we utilize responses to intervention. I'll talk a little more in specificity about RTI in just a moment. The second piece is looking at assessments, and again, they talked about the use of common formative assessments, which is the first bullet, and the 4th bullet down talks about common planning in order to create those common assessments, not only the assessments that we have at the division level, but just regular everyday common assessments that they use as a team to determine what kids know, understand, and are able to do based on what was taught on a more frequent basis. Sometimes a common assessment can be something as simple as an exit ticket based on what was taught during that day so that teachers know right then and there what students understand based on what was taught that day. So they feel that those things in terms of assessment really help them with the gains that they saw.
Dr. Rogers?
Yes.
Could you just
I'm sorry.
explain what an exit ticket is?
What an
I
exit
missed that
ticket,
day
I'm
as
sorry.
a teacher.
An exit ticket, for example, if I taught you, I'm going to be on my adding and subtracting fractions. An exit ticket may be something as simple as having a problem written on the board that asks what is 1/2 plus 1/2, and you write that answer down on that index card, and as you leave the classroom, I can just check from that simple index card and separate who did and who did not understand what I just taught. So that I could, as I plan for the next day, I know I have 3 kids that didn't understand that. So the next day, hopefully I can pull those 3 kids and say, hey, you didn't understand what I just taught yesterday. Let me reteach you. So they feel that that had quite a bit to do with what their gains were. Data analysis, I'd like to direct your attention to 2 bullets. The first are data notebooks, keeping data notebooks in terms of what formative assessment shared, as well as summative assessments, which are quizzes and tests and things of that nature. And then, again, the common planning that, did I just get ahead of myself? I did. The common planning that addresses that. The data analysis, I talked about data notebooks. And the last part, data plans that are created from the common formative assessments, as well as the division benchmark assessment data to help drive instructional decisions that they made on a regular basis. Dr. Gabriel mentioned these pieces of information, which is alignment of curriculum, instruction, and assessment being used to drive the professional development based on need. And they felt that these were some of the more frequent items that were attributed to some of the gains that they realized. The second being enhancing response to intervention, because they felt that they were better able to catch what students were able to retain and understand, and be able to diagnose what was needed in order to adjust instruction so that they could help students master the skills that were taught. And about midway down our Kagan strategy training, I found that quite compelling because that teaches best practice that can be used as part of RTI. So there were some pieces that I thought were very purposeful and strategic in terms of professional development that we certainly plan on continuing this school year. Which brings me to this slide, which is a slide that I shared with you last year. Based on the data that were available at the time, and certainly what we've reviewed this evening, the 3 big areas that we look at that have great need for us to address holistically from the instructional perspective is to look at literacy across the board, K-12, special education, not only those with IEPs, but certainly our gifted learners as well, and then looking at middle schools as a whole. So if we would look at 3 big key pieces, those would be the 3 big key pieces that we would look at. And then more specifically, I also shared this slide with you as well, and I'll breeze through this and then go into a little more detail with one of them. One is lesson plan feedback. There's an old adage in education that talks about what gets monitored gets done. And it's not to be big brother, but of course we want to help each other get better. So lesson plans are the roadmap to success in any profession. So the lesson plan is something that we will certainly continue our work with. Strengthening the use of data analysis to inform instructional decisions. Conducting a literacy program assessment, and I have been in touch with our fantastic literacy or English staff, and we've already begun planning what those initial steps may be. Creating consistent structures as well as practices for how we monitor instruction and how we provide feedback and coaching and professional development for our staff. Working closely with principals to identify specific areas of need and support. And we've already started those conversations. As I mentioned just a few minutes ago, we've already had one meeting last week with all of our principals in conjunction with the Virginia Department of Education to begin a conversation about how we can delve a little deeper into looking at data. And lastly on this slide is providing professional development that is connected to our school improvement plans. We want everything to make sense that are based on those 3 big areas. So I want to go a little deeper in terms of what our next steps in terms of looking at how we strengthen our use of data analysis to inform instructional decisions. And I want to go back to one thing, assessment, how we plan for assessment and being purposeful to make sure that we're not over-testing students, which is attributed to what Dr. Gabriel just said. And I just had a conversation earlier today with our instructional staff about looking at some of the assessments that we're requiring our staff to do, and we're probably going to scale back on at least one of them based on the conversation that I have had today, and we'll bring that to cabinet. How we schedule them, and then the VDOE administrative training. Those conversations will continue through December with our principals, and probably more meetings than that. The second square talks about response to intervention. That is going to be low-hanging fruit for us, I think, in being purposeful and strategic with how we provide interventions and how we utilize our interventionists as well as our specialists. And the question, I think it was, who asked the question about looking at triangulating data about, okay. So part of the RTI process, we have 3 specific meetings that are being planned and structured. The first of which calls for our administrators to do creating a hypothesis based on data that show or can explain why they got the results they got. And it causes them to give what I refer to as ABCs: academics, behavior, and coming to school. So those three pieces they'll look at to see whether they have any correlation to how students performed throughout the course of the year. So we will continue that work. And then the third piece is looking at our instructional applications, what resources we have available to us to help us diagnose where we are with our students, one of which is STAR Reading and Math, which will be used as a universal screener for our elementary students. iReady Reading and Math, most of our elementary schools will be able to use that. I'm excited about that. And then, of course, using PALS, which is consistent across the state of Virginia. So those are our next steps. We've only had about 3.5 weeks to really formulate based on data. I was anxiously anticipating this meeting because it gave us an opportunity to look at all of our data, K-12. You guys have certainly given us pause for consideration for looking at additional data, so I'm excited about having an opportunity to take a look at that to see how we can meet our needs. And additionally, what other data do we have to look at? The SOLs are certainly not the end-all be-all and don't define who we are as a school division or who our students are. So we will be certainly looking at advanced placement tests and how our students are performing. How many students do we have enrolled in our advanced placement courses? Are we encouraging students who have potential to be in advanced placement courses but wouldn't otherwise do so without an extra push? Looking at SAT and ACT scores, as you all may very well know, some of those assessments have changed, and working with our College Board representative, Kale Golden, to work with our schools to make sure that we are meeting kids where they need to be so they can be successful on those assessments. And looking at district climate survey results, one thing that I didn't mention, as part of the RTI process, it does have a parental engagement piece that schools would need to look at to make sure that they are addressing that piece as well. And then lastly, and I'll talk more specifically about that after your questions, is the Office of School Improvement and what the goals were for 2015-16, what they were for last year, and the progress that we've seen thus far. So at this time, I know it's pretty quick, but if you have questions and answers, I'll be happy to provide answers or work with my colleagues to provide them. Yes.
Ms. Wagner.
Yes.
And I'm gonna get to that one too, but I'm just looking at, I know you talked about advanced placement. What are we doing with, in terms of dual enrollment? Have we?
That's a great question, and we just had a conversation. John, you want Mr. Coleman?
Last year, we had dual enrollment in 2 of our high schools, excuse me, with Tidewater Community College. This year, we've expanded that, so all 5 high schools will now have a first semester college English class, English 111, and a second semester English 112. So all 5 high schools will have a full dual enrollment program that hopefully will continue to expand each year. It's been a very deliberate approach. It worked very successfully last year with Booker T. Washington and Lake Taylor. This year, all 5 high schools will be on board with dual enrollment.
What's the criteria for the dual enrollment?
The criteria is that they have to still meet entrance requirements for Tidewater Community College. So what we have is a summer bridge program. So we identify students who are interested, then they're offered the opportunity to go to Tidewater Community College for what we call a summer bridge program. They take some, I won't call it coursework, but they do some review work, and then they take the entrance exams. And based on those entrance exams, they can qualify as a student to go to Tidewater. Most of our students have been very successful, with that so far. These are not students that are the very top AP class students. These are students, though, that might not necessarily be going to a full 4-year program initially, but because they can get that foot in the door with Tidewater Community College, earn some college credit at very little cost, and actually the district picks up part of that cost, they are able to earn college credit, making them more attractive as college students when they do go.
So the district picks up half the cost, and the homes is
Part of the cost.
Can they do a FAFSA with that?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, they don't need, the cost isn't that much.
Okay.
We're talking $25 per student.
Oh, okay, okay.
Ms. Messine?
in recent years, there has been some concern among teachers with what used to be the sharing of lesson plans, where teachers, some teachers, I guess it gave some heartburn because it's an art to develop a lesson plan, according to some. And I'm just curious about the collaboration, how you involve the teachers in the decision-making process of what that collaboration would look like.
That is a fantastic question, and not having been a part of the Norfolk Public Schools culture, but having been a teacher for 9 years, I refer to that as being the egg drop contest teacher, a science teacher that had an egg drop contest that I taught with, that wanted to be the only teacher who taught the egg drop contest, where a kid would design this structure that an egg would be able to survive if it were dropped off the top of the building. Well, I wanted to be an egg drop teacher as well. So you have teachers that hoard lessons, and you have other teachers that are pretty collaborative in nature. I think because the onset of high stakes testing, that the idea of lesson plan hoarding is gradually dissipating, and the expectation is that when structures are put in place at the school level to ensure collaboration amongst teams and teachers, that you have a lot more sharing. In fact, I encourage sharing of ideas and resources, which is one of the reasons why you have the IMNPS on your shirt, so that we can foster this idea of collaboration and sharing ideas and resources. So I don't know what the practice has been, but I would certainly work with the instructional staff to ensure that we are collaborating.
Dr. Gabriel, Dr. Robinson, Ms. Doyle, Ms. Wagner.
Okay. I just wanted to comment on the presentation in general. I thought it was a very good demonstration of us using the data to tell our story, to tell it as valid as we see it. I think that it is going to allow us to make the leap to making appropriate goals, and for us to, as a board, develop the goals and the priorities, and then in turn, we can give it back to our parents and our community members to bring back that shared responsibility and say, these are our goals, and specifically, this is what you can help us out with. And I think that every parent wants to be able to help their child, and we know this to be fact. It's easier if you say, other than just, read with your child every night, perhaps read some books about science with your kids every night. I think that when we look at the data and we disaggregate it very specifically, as we're doing now, and it doesn't have to be necessarily at the board level all the time, but to give parents purposeful instruction of how they can help their child and make sure that they're comfortable with doing it, I think that it's just going to turn out to be a win-win situation for all of us, and they're going to feel good because they have focus, the kids are going to have focus, the teachers are going to have focus, and we're going to see more and more of our schools make that trend past 75, past 80. So I'm just really appreciative that we're being true to the data, we're using it to tell our story, we're going to use it to develop our goals. So I really appreciate all the hard work that went into putting this presentation and the weeks before presentation together.
Dr. Robinson?
Just real quickly, as a teacher in the beginning, lesson plan writing is most difficult. Very challenging to do. And in the readings that I've done is that actually some school divisions provide the lesson plans for all first-year teachers so they can focus on the pedagogy. So that they can focus on teaching rather than having to do the lesson plan. So I'm hopeful that lesson plan hoarding is going to be a thing of the past.
So as well.
Ms. Doyle?
I have a few questions that are kind of more global in nature. One goes back to what Dr. Bailey said. The state's going to come out with new ratings in the latter part of October. Will that apply to this year's scores, or will it be moving forward for the 15-16 scores?
It'll apply to this year's score. Actually, I've got the email from Dr. Staples' office here. So DOE is expected to issue a news release on the 2015-16 accreditation ratings based on new regulations and guidelines on October 27th. And it'll be for 2015-16 ratings.
So not the data we're seeing today, because that's 14, 15.
No, it'll be based on 14-15 results
Right.
for 15-16 accreditation ratings or
Perfect.
status.
Okay, great. So we'll really have, Len, 2 layers of accreditation application this year. One is under the current model, and then that we know today, and then one will be after October.
The idea is that if this passes, and I'm just reading here directly from the information from DOE, is that if the revised accreditation ratings are approved, then you would have fully accredited, you would have conditionally accredited, new school, partially accredited, approaching benchmark. So the idea is to show that perhaps you may not be fully accredited, but you're partially accredited, approaching benchmark, partially accredited, improving school, partially accredited, warned school, and partially accredited, reconstituted school, and then, of course, accreditation denied. So the idea is that it won't be a fully accredited or denied.
Okay.
There's something in between to show, based on growth and progress, where you are on the continuum in becoming fully accredited, and not just the fact that you're not accredited or you've been denied accreditation.
Okay. So will then that impact our applications for conditional accreditation for the 7 schools now? And will they wait to respond to that application on our end until this is more relevant?
It doesn't speak to that specifically, but I would imagine that it will have an impact on the accreditation, conditional accreditation status, because,
Right.
again, we're asking for conditional accreditation, but
Under the
then these
current.
will be correct.
Right.
But these will, with these new, potentially new ratings, then it could be partially accredited, so I'm sure it will have an impact.
Okay. 2 more just quick ones, and that is, I know you can't give the answer now, and maybe I'm asking for vapor, but we've asked about this before, and that is, how do we measure the success of professional development? And can we put a measure in place, a hard measure, to say, if you do this much professional development in this fashion, you're expected to achieve this outcome? And again, you may have an answer today. If not, I think as a division, we need to look at it, because we very much focus on it. It's very important. And if we can measure that, that means that we can allocate the right amount of budget and other resource to support it, knowing what it is expected for the ROI on it.
I do think that professional development is measurable. Of course, you have a pre and post assessment to determine what the needs are. And I think our data certainly gives us pause for consideration in identifying what our needs are. And then, of course, once you identify what the professional development is after it's been given, much of which is probably going to be anecdotal in nature by getting information from teachers. Teachers ideally know what they need. If you ask me, what do I need to be more successful in my job, I'd certainly be able to communicate that to you, and it's my role as the building administrator or division level administrator to ensure that I provide you with your needs. For example, if I need assistance in classroom management, and I've gotten professional development on classroom management, well, data would be able to show at the end of the school year, for example, if I were a first-year teacher and I had 20 referrals for classroom infractions. Well, after having been exposed to some type of professional development based on classroom management at the end of my second year, perhaps that's going down to 10. So I would have some good hard, fast data that would support being able to have professional development that's centered around professional development. So that's but one measure. So I do think that, short answer, that it is measurable.
Okay. And then lastly, just one question, that is, at the schools that have opportunity for more growth, when are we going to talk about the kinds, types, and amount of resources we need to allocate to those schools that we know now need that kind of attention? Because it's September 2nd, school starts Tuesday, we have a whole school year ahead of us, and we know that there are schools that need additional focus. So what is it, and when is it we are going to know that?
One of the efforts that we've already made is that we have realigned additional Title I funding in the new application that's already in effect that we got approved back in July to support the addition of more RTI specialists. And those individuals will be out there to support schools based on the data. So that's one targeted effort that we've already made that we'll put in place in terms of investing Title I, reinvesting Title I, reallocating Title I funds more strategically to get some direct impact on those schools that are in most need of it. Dr. Rogers, anything?
I think you're true to your statement. When we will have those conversations, as I'm still learning, I find that we have a lot of resources, human resources particularly, and it's my goal, and I've had many conversations with Dr. Thornton, with being very purposeful and strategic with how we use the human resources that we have. I think we can, always use more, but I think we have to be smart with what we have now, so we know what to ask for.
So I think if at some point when you do make those decisions, to share those back with the board so that we know what you're addressing, and is there anything more as a board that we need to do either through budget or policy to enhance, support what you're doing?
And last question, Ms. Wagner, or last set of questions, so you then move to the next.
Again, thank you all for your hard work. We do appreciate it. But I do have a question, concern, or whatever, mainly dealing with data for the high school. And I know that the state requires certain, how we look at data in a specific way. But are we looking at data to make sure, and maybe I'm not phrasing this right, that all kids, are inclusive? And let me give you a better example. Are we looking at enrollment in the beginning of the school year? And I think I've asked this question before, and I was looking for the data here, but I didn't see it. The enrollment in the school in the beginning of school year, and let's just say ninth graders, and the rescheduling of students, and how many students actually take the SOLs in the spring. How many students are suspended at that time? Let's look at the Novanet, and let's look at those that were actually rescheduled and did not take the test. I would like to see the data and see where we stand.
The short answer to your question, Ms. Wagner, is yes, and we did have that conversation, and just recently, I did request that very information from all of our high schools to see, particularly in the area of math. I didn't ask for the other ones. That's typically where the rescheduling
I would
occurs.
really like to see it in every area, and I would like to really start looking at our ninth graders. And there's, because when you look at your feeder schools,
Sure.
and what we're having there, and what's coming over to the high school, it would just be of interest to me to see,
Well,
the growth.
I think it's good data to have, just in general, and we've talked about it before, so we can get that for you, sure.
We need to move on to our policy. Is it? Okay, all right, but it's a super quick answer.
So just as we talked about looking at correlations with the SOLs at the elementary school level, I think, when I brought that question up, I think it's important to look at that, the secondary level as well. So I think it'd be interesting to see that, if we can do that.
If you and the administration, in my mind, has been very accepting of our questions. So if there are other things that come up, if we can share it and compile it, and then we can present it to them for future work session, or just giving us information in between, I think we can do that. So, thank you to the team and Dr. Thornton. Next on the agenda is, you have anything else? Oh, you still have some more? Oh, shit. Okay. See?
All right.
All right. My fault.
Let me see, is it mine too?
Is it a separate presentation?
Is it a separate?
It is.
It is?
Yeah, it's a separate, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, that's what.
All right, so while they're pulling that up, I can just speak briefly. The Office of School Improvement was created last year in order to provide more focus and support for the school improvement schools, our schools that are identified as priority, focus, and warn, by reorganizing our school leadership department. The executive director of this department is responsible for collaborating with our Virginia Department of Education on behalf of all of the schools that are in improvement. And 7 goals were identified or established to guide the work of the department and are centered on the United States Department of Education 7 turnaround principles. And I'm going to provide you with an update on those 7 goals. And those goals were identified or scheduled in the fall. Sorry. Okay. Is that? Okay, yes it is. Okay, I'm sorry. Identified in the fall. All right, good. So what you have in front of you reflects Goal 1, and Goal 1 talks about Norfolk Public Schools, priority schools making measurable progress in reading, and in grades 3 through 5, SRO reading scores in each priority school will increase by equal or greater than 15%, and in grades 6 through 8, reading scores in each priority school will increase by equal to or greater than 15%. All of our schools improved in their reading scores, and the range of improvement is 2 to 12 percentage points. However, none of our priority schools met the goal of increasing their reading scores by 15% or higher from the previous school year, and that slide just indicates that. This next chart shows results from Goal 2 that speaks to Norfolk priority schools making measurable progress in mathematics. And in grades 3 through 5, the goal was to increase by equal to or greater than 10 percentage points. And in grades 6 through 8, the same. And as you can see, 5 out of 6 of our schools, or 83%, met the goal by increasing their mathematics score by 10% or more. So in other words, as you can see, all of the schools, the priority schools, did make some progress. This next chart focuses on Goal 3, which states by June of 2015, 100% of our priority schools will improve parent involvement by 10%, as measured by a parent response on the annually measured parent survey. And as you can see, we have 4 out of our 6 schools improve their teacher morale by 10%, as indicated in the chart that's there. Goal 4 talks about our priority schools improving teacher morale by 10%, as measured by the annually administered teacher survey. And as you can see, 4 out of 6 of our priority schools improved teacher morale by 10 percentage points or more. Goal 5 talks about our priority schools making measurable progress in reducing student discipline, and the infractions were expected to decrease by 10%, as measured by the monthly discipline infractions report. And as you can see, 3 out of our 6 priority schools decreased their discipline infractions by 10% from the previous school year. And then Goal 6 speaks to all of our priority school principals having rating the Office of School Turnaround and Improvement as excellent or above average on the OSTE end-of-year survey results. And as you can see, 4 out of our 6 priority schools rated the services from the OSTE office as above average, as indicated in the chart that's there. And then lastly, Goal 7 speaks to the OSTE staff providing on-site services to their assigned schools at 5 or more days per month, as measured by the monthly service log. And as you can see, 100% of our staff in the OSTE department were able to provide on-site services to their assigned schools 5 or more days per month. And 6 of our schools were served. All right. So that's just a really quick update on the progress of the Office of School Improvement. Questions?
Yeah. Which of the elementary schools really stand out among these priorities as having made significant progress in your estimation?
I'm going to defer to, without having that data, to comparison, either Dr. Willard or Dr. Bailey. You have it in front of you. Hold on, I can look at slide, yeah.
Slide 3. You can see Campus Stella saw a significant increase compared to last year. It looks like they were more than approximately 27 points on reading. When you look at where they were last year, at about 27, 28%. And then at the end of this past year, they were at 39%, so about 10, 12 points. And then you look at Jaycox.
Yeah, I was looking at
significant
Jaycox.
growth for Jaycox.
It seems to me that Jaycox.
At 30 to 42, 43%. Then, of course, Monroe. So they all look like those top three, about 12 points in reading. But then in math, of course, Campus Stella is where they saw nearly a 25 percentage point growth. And then Jaycox again. Of course, Jaycox last year was the first year of Mr. Cumberbatch Smith being the principal.
That's right.
And he was assigned to Jaycox for that reason, to bring that type of leadership to begin to turn the school around. And you can see the other schools there.
Yep.
Any other question? All right, thank you.
Dr. Thornton.
Well, thank you to the team for pulling together the report for the board and the community to hear today. A lot of work has gone in. It's a work in progress. We appreciate the feedback that we received from the board as we began to roll out the initial versions of the report. It helped us to refine and address some of the specific questions that the board had and those that they thought the community would be interested in as well. Our data reporting and analysis and interpretation and application, it is a work in progress, but we're going to try to get it better and better each time. So thanks to Dr. Bailey, her team, and of course Dr. Rogers, his team, and everyone else that got us to this point.
Next. Is everybody okay? Anybody need a 2-minute break or anything? Okay, all right.
All right, agenda item 2.03, school board policy review. Dr. Birdsong.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Mr. Jordan, Dr. Gabriel, members of the school board. Today I have a brief update for you regarding school board policies. We recently had a school board policy review committee meeting, and we reviewed several policies. And today we are prepared to speak with you about our draft equity policy and a timeline for the development of that. We also have information about our acceptable use policy and the timeline for our bring your own device policy. If you have questions around policy AC, we discussed that perhaps we would hold that off until the next school board work session, but if need be, if we need to discuss that today, we can certainly address any questions that you may have about that policy. And finally, we have 2 new policies to present to you today related to school board use of text messaging and employee use of text messaging. So you've had an opportunity to review these policies. Do you have any questions about any of them?
So let me just add that, so the non-discrimination, the AC.
Yes. And the regulation.
Yes. The AC policy review, we talked about in the committee the fact that we are adding specific language in there that you see before you, and we thought it was important to at least get that before the board for consideration now. If the board felt that it warranted additional discussion at the subsequent work session, we would do that. Otherwise, we would move to put it on the consent agenda. So we wanted to at least make sure everybody saw what was coming forward and get any feedback on that. So if there's no objection, we would put it on the consent agenda for the next business meeting. If there's a desire to have further presentation and discussion, then we could do that as well. So hearing no objection, then we will plan to, Dr. Thornton, to put that on the next consent agenda.
AC and ACR. AC.
Yes, yes. And then, as Dr. Birdsong mentioned, the school board use of text messaging, are you
Yes,
going to do that now?
sure.
Okay.
Okay, as I mentioned earlier, there are 2 new policies, and again, those policies were provided to you in board docs. Policy BBABZ, school board use of text messaging, and policy GABZ, employee use of text messaging. The cabinet had an opportunity to review both of those policies. We also had a discussion about them in the policy review committee meeting, and so please bring your attention to those 2 policies. Basically, text messaging with personal phones is highly discouraged. And so if an employee or a school board member chooses to do so, you need to convert that text message into an email message. And so, again, we're discouraging you from doing so. Mr. Jordan did bring up the fact that school board members don't have phones issued by the school board, and so that's something else that we need to discuss.
Yeah, Ms. Doyle?
I think at some point we just either now or later or whenever, discuss the process by which we convert those to emails.
Yes.
What's the timeliness of it, frequency of it, et cetera, et cetera. I think policy's fine and great, we need to do it, it's a good thing. But then what's the process behind it, and when do we truly get it in place so we can be accountable to it?
Yeah, and that's part of what we discussed in the committee. Mr. Cloud, did you want to add anything more in terms of how you look to mirror or align our policy on the school board side with work that you all have done on the city side?
Yes, the policy is modeled on a policy that the city promulgated a few months ago. Coming out of, there was a lawsuit over access to text messages through the Freedom of Information Act, and it was settled by creating a policy similar to this as a way of preserving these messages, which are public records and people have a right to access to.
So going back to your point, Mrs. Doyle, I think operationally, you as administration, you all looking at what would be required to support this?
Operationally, it'll be fairly simple. From a school board standpoint, or either from a staff standpoint, looking at text messaging, if we're going to use it, of course, it's highly discouraged at this point to be using text messaging for work purposes, but if we're going to use it, whomever you're texting, put your email address in that as well. So you're not only sending it, I'm not only sending my text message to Mr. Jordan, I'm sending my text message to Mr. Jordan and my MPS email address. At this point, it gets copied every time he and I respond to each other through that messaging, that original message. It's being copied to my email and it's automatically in there. I'm not having to go back later on and remember to copy it in there. It's automatically going in there every time he and I continue with that group of messages that we were on. It's a little more to it, but that way you're not having to go back and copy and paste and do all that.
Yeah, so.
And maybe we can do a little,
Sure.
little how-to script or whatever to.
So in your 2-line.
Exactly.
You add the email address.
Exactly.
Basically what you're saying.
Right. And then that way, and what you actually see in your email when that happens is you actually see the phone number coming across.
Right.
So it's easy to spot what your text messages are.
And this is for anything? Any?
Work related.
And so that
Well,
is.
what's the definition of work-related?
So,
Lunch will be served at 1 o'clock, is that work-related?
I mean, the idea is that we're trying to make sure that we're complying with.
I understand, I'm just trying
And
to
so
get a
it just makes
definition.
it easier, so if you get the request for FOIA purposes, then it's easier for the staff to go through and pull those things out versus having to try to grab your phone and go through and do all of that, so. And one of the things we talked about, as Dr. Birdsong mentioned, because we know from a school board side, you know, we aren't issued phones at this point. And so we just had a preliminary discussion of whether or not it would just be easier that if we are doing any text messaging from a board perspective, we just had a Norfolk Public Schools phone. And then, you know, it's just easier to deal with than having to worry about your personal, your business, and your school board business. But that's not something that we've determined yet, but just for the sake of ease was something that we had a conversation about. But regarding the policy itself, are there any additional questions about the policy? Dr. Birdsong, anything else? You mentioned the BYOD timeline.
Yes, and Ms. Sikora has provided a timeline for us. We did have a discussion early on during our policy review committee meeting about the timeline, and so we went back to make some revisions. And so, Mrs. Sikora, if you want to talk about the timeline.
Yeah, and this, if they want a copy, I've provided a copy in case you guys want to take a look at what it is that we've last landed on as far as a timeline. This was shared with the policy committee last week. Dr. Rogers and I also had a meeting this week, and we fleshed out a little bit more information moving forward as far as discussing members for the BYOD committee participant list, meetings coming up for this year, and who we thought should be part of that so that this does not continue to drag on. What you'll notice on your timeline is we are starting currently. It's not something that we haven't been working on, so this has been in the works for some time. One of the dates that may stand out for you is October timeframe, where we did put on there pilot select schools, and that will be determined by the committee. And then as we move forward, looking at December as potentially a time frame that we would be able to provide some network support for BYOD. But I think a key piece to this is the professional development that the teaching staff will need to be able to know how to manage those devices. Dr.
Just to provide some additional clarity, with the idea that we are certainly going to begin with a pilot. I don't like to refer to a pilot as pilot because pilot does suggest that there's potential to go back. And of course, with the BYD program, if you let the genie out of the bottle, it's out. So you have to deal with that. So what we are proposing to do is to have a rather large steering committee to help us identify what is going to be our practice in Norfolk Public Schools as it relates to BYOD. And that steering committee will certainly consist of building level administrators, teachers, central office administrators, parents, community members, and ITRTs to help us shape what the BYOD process looks like in our school division. As Ms. Sikora just mentioned, the biggest piece that I am most concerned about from an instructional perspective is making sure that we provide ample professional development for our instructional staff and our administrative staff to make sure that they know how to approach the idea or the concept of having students bring their own devices to school. The idea is to have a 5-meeting committee to help shape what our work will be in regards to that, so as not to prolong the process, because I don't think it requires any more than those 5 meetings, all the while the pilot, if you will still be underway. So we're excited about that. Our first meeting is tentatively scheduled for October 15, and we look forward to providing an update to Dr. Thornton to share with you, if nothing less but a copy of our meeting minutes to see where we are with the process.
So just for clarification, then, in the BYOD Phase 0 for,
Yes.
for October 2015, is the idea that that is saying that that's when your first meeting is going to take place, or that's when select schools will begin to integrate BYOD?
That October 15 date is the date that we're proposing that our steering committee have their first meeting. And simultaneously, during the month of October, and the date has not been identified, the schools who are identified in Phase 0 would be also participating. So we'd be working in concert with them.
So I just wanted to clarify that because there have been discussions at the board level about trying to get that moving in October timeframe, so everyone's clear that they're looking at doing that, but also looking at the bigger global picture to make sure that all the other supports that are needed can occur. And did you also want to mention, to the extent that it's relevant, the difference between connecting to the network and not being able to connect to the network?
Yes, phase 0, where we would be starting out, is just allowing the students to bring the devices into the classroom and be used during class time with the teacher. Again, like I said, we are projecting that December timeframe is when we will be able to start supporting actually having them on the network. The software is in place, we're building that piece of it and configuring it so that once we do provide that guest network, these students will be able to log on to it, will have access to the internet, but it will be filtered, which will meet all of the requirements. Yeah.
Andrea, just clarify for the board and the audience what we mean by guest network versus our existing network.
Our guest network, or what I'm calling our guest network, is going to allow them to have access to the internet, but they will not have access to their student folders or anything that is on our internal network. And what that does is based on the fact that they could be bringing in a multitude of devices. We aren't sure if they're all safe, if there's not something else on that. It's protecting our network, but giving them the resources to be able to access the internet and do any type of research or projects that the teachers may need them to be doing.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
And so just to give you a little bit of information around the development of our equity policy, again, the Cabinet has had many opportunities to review the draft policy. And I mentioned to you previously, months ago, that we were using the Roanoke policy as a model policy as we work to develop our own policy. It appears that they're the only school division within Virginia that currently has an equity policy, so we've been kind of using them as a model. And so since the Cabinet has had a number of opportunities to kind of be involved in the development, we thought that it would be important for other stakeholders to also be involved in the process. So we will be convening a committee, hopefully we have planned for by the end of September. And that committee would be comprised of at least 3 principal representatives, an elementary, a middle school, and a high school principal, a PTA representative, a representative from the Norfolk Education, not the Norfolk Education Foundation, the NFT, the Norfolk Federation of Teachers, as well as EAN, the Education Association of Norfolk, and 2 representatives, one from GAC and one from SEAC. And so we would hope to get some strong feedback from them in developing that policy. And then the Cabinet would again review the policy, the draft policy, in October based upon the recommendations made by this committee. And then the Policy Review Committee would have an opportunity to look at the draft policy at the end of October. And we're hoping to be able to present something to the board by November 2015, a final project or a final product. So that's the timeline around the equity policy.
Questions? Dr. Thornton, Dr. Birdsong, anything else?
Okay, that concludes my presentation.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Burson.
All right, so last on our agenda are certain matters of the board. Just to reiterate, we agreed earlier in the meeting to reaffirm our mission and beliefs and other high-level portions of our strategic plan, which we're going to affirm by vote at our next business meeting. We also have before us our values and norms and code of ethics. And during the summer, we looked at those. I think we may have had some conversation about there may be a possibility to collapse the values and norms and the code of ethics into one document because they seem to somewhat repeat themselves. But as you've had an opportunity to go back and look at it, let's start with the values and norms. What's your pleasure or thoughts in regards to any modifications to the values and norms as they exist currently? Dr. Gabriel.
Well, I don't mean to give us more work than what we already have, but after reading the document on the 8 characteristics of effective school boards and reading the norms, the values, and even to a certain extent our ethics, I was wondering if we wanted to perhaps redo the document so that it incorporates all 3 of the points made in the values, the norms, and the ethics, but with the basis of the characteristics of effective school boards as its premise. And again, I don't want to give us more work, but most of this stuff we are already doing in our documents. It is just specifically pointing out, effective school boards will have a collaborative relationship with staff and the community and establish strong communications. We speak to that in our norms. We speak to that in our values. But I think it might be good for us to very explicitly put that language into what we are saying that we are going to believe in, because I think eventually we sign our name.
Yes.
And then we will hang it, and then we will even vote on it. Of
Right.
Of course, but I didn't know how you all thought about that idea.
So Dr. Gabriel is volunteering to come forward with some revisions. Anyone have any thoughts to her recommendation? Ms. Doyle?
I think it's a good idea. We need something to react to. We need to see what the red line looks like and then say yes, no. So if you'd like some help, I'd be happy to
I was
work
gonna
with
ask
you
if
on
somebody
that.
like to-
Okay.
So if you and I wanted to get together, we can collapse it,
Okay.
redline it, send it back out, next meeting, review it, move on.
Okay.
We don't want to kick this can
Well,
down the road
and that's-
too much longer.
Yep.
Right. And that was going to be my next statement, that if we do that, let's set a date to it so that we can
Okay.
come back and act on it.
So if we can do this before the next work session, give it to people for
Mhm.
review, discuss it at work session, to then maybe vote on it at the next.
So it'd be the
business.
October business meeting?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Does that work for everybody?
Everybody comfortable with that?
If anybody has any ideas in the meantime that you'd like to see in here, let us know, but we'll move forward and then you can react.
And then the one thing we did talk about was how or if we would integrate the superintendent being the face of the district into that.
Yes, that was
I actually
in.
have that
Yeah.
language from what we discussed
Right.
in July,
Okay,
so that's not lost.
Mhm.
right, okay.
I have it too.
And then, Dr. Thornton, we would also need you to take a look at the code of ethics, and we could also take a look at the code of ethics for the superintendent as well. There is a document there, and so we just want to make sure any adjustments that we make also align with the superintendent's code of ethics as well. Okay. Yes, sir.
October 7th is the work session, and then
Okay.
October 21st would be the business meeting.
Okay.
Just a heads up that way.
We'll be done by tomorrow, don't worry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if we get out of here tonight.
Yeah.
And so that was quick. One other thing then under, well, a couple of things. First, Ms. Banks and Ms. Karen Tanner had been working on the concept that we had talked about with inviting members of the public in or members of the staff in as part of a chat and chew discussion when we have dinner opportunities during our business meeting. And Ms. Banks and Ms. Tanner worked on something, and Ms. Banks, we have time if you'd like to come to the podium and talk about some of the work that you all have been doing thus far.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
As Mr. Jordan said, in an effort to support your being a board of distinction, we developed a process to invite guests to dinner, so for an informal chew and chat. And the idea was to engage the community on all levels, from staff, students, parents, all different types of stakeholders. So we thought we could begin with inviting up to a maximum of 3 guests to the dinner meal and allow them a chance to meet and greet with the school board. And we had developed a process of selecting those guests for your review. So the first list will probably, let's just say, for example, the representatives from the principals associations from the elementary, middle, and high school level. And so they would come and, meet in whatever topic you would want to discuss. That would be up to you. And we will give the board, of course, an opportunity to vet the guest list before sending out the invitations. So the idea is to determine the guest list the meeting before the meeting that they'll be attending the dinner. So that'll give us about, 3 to 4 weeks.
And they've done a nice write-up that they can send out for review and feedback, but they've done a lot of good work, and Ms. Doyle, I think you also worked with them on that as well. So it seems to me that once the board gets a chance to review it, it's pretty much ready for implementation. But any questions or thoughts for Ms. Banks on that topic?
Great, and I'll be happy to send that draft out in just a few moments.
And Ms. Banks, while you're there, is there anything else? I know you also mentioned we have the legislative.
Yes, the legislative breakfast. Each year we meet with the delegates for Norfolk and from the state and local level. And in November, we generally hold a breakfast that gives you an opportunity to discuss the priorities that you have set for the year before the General Assembly meets in January or February of the next year. So that's coming up really quickly. And each year, Dr. Stewart was a champion behind that with giving you the draft list of priorities. So those are posted for your review and discussion, along with the VSBA recommendations of their legislative priorities and an overview of the actions taken by the General Assembly for 2015. So all of that is posted for your review.
So is the VSBA 16 legislative priorities posted?
Yes.
And we need to infuse those that we accept or would like to endorse
That's correct.
into our own?
That's correct.
Okay.
And generally, you pick about 4 or 5 that you support, and then maybe, 3 or 4 that you oppose, and then you get the buy-in from the legislators. So each one in the past, each board member was assigned a legislator to meet with in order to get, their feedback and position on those priorities.
So how about if I do this? I'll take this past year's legislative priorities, look at VSBA's, do a red line, combine them, see what we want to keep, delete, and/or add, because I know coming out of the Challenge Schools Task Force, there's a recommendation about the General Assembly providing additional financial support for challenged districts, right?
Correct.
And so I don't know if that's in the VSBA's or not, but if not, I would suggest we would want it in there.
Yes.
So do you want me to just go ahead and do that?
Yeah, I think we should look at that, and then also do it with an eye of not just keeping things because we've always had them in the past.
I agree.
So you remember last year we made a lot of push around extended learning time.
Right.
And we whether or not we've then implemented that or not remains to be seen. So I would say that as you take a look at it, just look at all of it and come back with some things that we think are relevant as we go into this new session.
Okay, so how about if before, again, the next work session, I have something along the timeline that Dr. Gabriel and I will work on for the other, so that we can see it beforehand, review it, talk about it, and then decide what our priorities are perhaps then, and vote business, and we'll be prepared for then the November meeting. Because right now, I frankly would be feeling a little vulnerable if I went to Delegate John Smith and said, please support, when I don't really know what we as a group have decided we want John Smith to support.
I agree.
Okay.
I guess we can talk offline about the logistics, because time to get the invitations and those type of things out.
But it seems like it is the will of the board to proceed with having the joint meeting.
Oh,
And-
yeah.
And then, so from a logistic standpoint of us saying, yes, we're going to have it, we
Okay.
want to have the meeting, and then the
Yes.
content of it we'll work on based upon the timeline that Ms. Doyle described a moment
Okay,
ago.
that sounds good.
Yeah,
So can move forward with at least getting the invitations out.
And I think frankly, it's good timing because it's after the election, which we might have some new folks we want to invite. And
Right.
for those that are remaining in their seats, we would certainly want to have them invited as well. So I think it's a come one, come all session.
And right now, it's scheduled for Tuesday, November 17th, from 8 to 10 at the Town Point.
Okay.
All right, anyone else have any other matters for the board at this time? Ms. Doyle?
I do in general. When are we going to come together and determine our goals for the year?
Dr. Thornton, you want to help us walk through that? So we've gone through this initial data. Part of what we saw at the end of this was dealing with the other indicators that Dr. Rogers mentioned. So I was anticipating we would do that at the next work session.
Okay.
So you still in sync with that? Yeah. So that same October 7th work session would be when we would do that.
So it'll be a goal framework?
Correct.
And you'll have measures in there that would be what we'd want to achieve and how we would do that?
Right, and then we also would need to take some of the things that we talked about at this meeting, at the August 5th meeting. I had shared with you a draft of a comprehensive accountability system that the
Right.
district used to use where they broke out different measures in different categories. So I think it's an opportunity for us to go back and look at that again, and as we have these conversations around how do we measure success beyond just state standards and other things, that, to me, that's the opportunity for us to also factor that into our goal setting.
Can you send that out again?
Yes.
Or can it be sent out
Yes.
again?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the next question I had was educational planning. When do you think we'll get an update with Dejan Richter on where we've been, where we're going, and what the next steps are with the master educational plan?
We are currently working with DeYoung Richter on the programming for Campus Stella.
Okay.
There, Dr. Rogers and his team have had some initial conversations with them. We've asked Tracy, he's got a staff member who has experience in STEM programming. So we have asked him, and he's agreed, of course, we still have them on the contract, to provide those type of services to us. So we're working on that as well. We had Tracy down about a month ago, and we had him in to talk about what our next steps are to get back on this track of some of those regional choice options. So we're going to continue that work in October, and we'll probably be at the November work session around that time, where we would invite Tracy to come back as we prepare for budget. So we're really going to align it with some of our budget and CIP planning.
Okay, good.
And now that we've had these discussions, I mean, at our next agenda planning, we'll need to roll out pretty much kind of the rest of this, at least for this calendar year, and lay those things out. So if there are other items or issues, I know that we had also talked about, as part of that process, taking another look at where we are with the milestones. I know Dr. Gabriel and I have talked about that. So all those things now, as the year's getting kicked off and we've had a chance to look at some snapshot data, we can really map that out for the remaining of the calendar year.
And to be honest, some of those milestones could be folded into the goal-setting
Yeah.
structure, and I don't
Yeah.
think they should be separate and apart or siloed.
Yeah.
They're infused.
Yeah, and we skipped the 8 characteristics of an effective school board. When you look at some of those milestones, and we had talked about it before, many of them are operational in nature. And so we had talked last year, I guess it was last May, that we were putting many of those things in the hands of the administration and then come back and give the board a timeline. And I think as we look at that, we have to make sure that we're taking a look at, what are the policy implications of some of those, while the administration is looking at the implementation of those items, when and how and how big and at what cost. Anything else, good people? All right, so any final questions? Anyone? Anything? Final word? Comments? Thoughts? Round robin? No one? Well, I'd just like to mention a couple of things. We received a thank you note from Katie Harris It says, thank you for recognizing my academic achievements and selecting me for the school board ODU scholarship. I'm honored to have been selected and will live up to your high expectations. So it was nice to receive that. And then we also received a thank you note from Mrs. Doyle and her husband Jack for the flowers and calls and notes and thoughts and prayers as they are going through their time of bereavement. And so we thank you for the thank you, and our prayers and thoughts continue to be with you and your family. So with that, if there's no other matter.
Well, we're 6
Ma'am?
days away.
Oh,
We're
yes.
6 days away from the first day of school.
Yes, you know.
Controlled chaos.
Yes, not
That's the goal.
not having children in school anymore, you know, it doesn't quite ring the same for me, but I'm sure Ms. Bassine and Dr. Gabriel get that. Yes. And then the other item that Ms. Banks just mentioned, you know, we have a policy around community advisory boards of the board. And so the way that we set things up previously, you know, we would get nominations in the February, March timeframe, and then in the September, October timeframe as a board, we're supposed to approve those advisory board members. So Ms. Banks has been going back, and Dr. Birdsong and others, and looking at all of our advisory boards, getting updates from the existing committees that we have, how they're structured, and so very soon, also coming up at a near-time meeting, we'll need to look at that again, make those approvals, and in particular, make sure that we have the right number of people and the right staggers based upon their bylaws and our policy. So we just didn't want to lose sight of, we have that responsibility as far as advisory boards are concerned. Dr. Gabriel.
Can I make a challenge to our parents out there? For Dr. Rogers, from our convocation this morning, hashtag #IamNPS with the photos. I do not have a Twitter account, but I'm assuming that's how it works, correct? Okay. So first day of school is going to be here. I have a kindergartner that will be starting school. I would like to make a challenge to all the kindergarten parents. Photo, if they can, with their, I know many of them have phones that take pictures. If they can take a picture of their child on the first day of school and put it up to #IamNPS, they will be the beginning class of the #IamNPS start for us. So I will do it, and I challenge all the other kindergarten parents out there to try to do that as well.
So Dr. Rogers.
Is that okay?
You may want to come up and just remind parents about giving permission for photos to be used, and as a parent who did do that, also just be cautious about not using names and addresses and other identifiable information should you
Just of
accept your challenge.
Of your
yes.
own child, yes.
Is that correct, sir? You're the expert in, okay. All right, so with that, I will call the meeting adjourned.